Every species was warned about human space. One fleet ignored it. The deck plating did not buckle from an explosion. It sheared cleanly along a geometric axis. Warmaster Vorskin pitched forward as his command deck tilted into a 30-degree slope. The main command screen of the Sovereign Gorgon did not flash with thermal fire. It simply died, its vibrant green status array snapping into an empty black void. Across the bridge, 40 separate combat consoles went dark at the exact same millisecond. "Report shields," Vorskin roared, his upper mandibles flaring wide against his blue-black collar carapace. "Name the battery that fired." The master of sensors did not touch his slate. The glass panel had already cracked from internal heat, its fluid leaking across his three-fingered hands. "No thermal signatures detected, Warmaster. No energy spikes. The hull is breaking because something solid has already passed through the center of our forward cruiser line." Vorskin gripped the edge of the navigation dais, his claws digging into the soft alloy plating. The ship groaned, a long tearing screech of structural metal under high tension that vibrated through the soles of his boots. The 45,000-ton heavy cruiser Vanguard 3 was visible through the thick observation glass. It was not burning. It had been neatly divided into 3 clean segments that were now drifting away from each other in the cold dark. "I wish I could tell you the destruction stopped there. It didn't. Stay close. The part that still keeps the remaining delegates awake at night, it wasn't the size of the weapon. It was the fact that no one was steering it." 48 hours earlier, the volcanic stone amphitheater of the Ethelgard conclave had echoed with a very different sound. The heavy, double-beat resonance of the imperial gavel struck the bronze sounding block 3 times. Vorskin stood at the center podium, his ceremonial sash of calcified vertebrae catching the sharp light of the overhead track arrays. He filled the space with his bulk, his shadow stretching across the curved rows of 4,000 voting delegates. "For 3 centuries, this body has maintained a red marker line around the Zephyr 7 marrow fields," Vorskin announced, his voice carrying without the aid of the audio relays. 43 star systems left entirely empty because of a warning note signed by an isolationist mammalian species. "The humans have built no fortifications there. They do not maintain a single hull in the lane. Our deep space scouts confirm 0 military signals across the entire perimeter." High Scholar Morwen stood up from the highest tier of the archives. Her Valeri skin looked like weathered silver leaf in the harsh glare, her silver robes rustling against the stone bench. "The Boundary Treaty is not an empty gesture, Warmaster," she said, her voice small but perfectly clear in the vast hall. "The founding members locked that space for a reason. You are voting to violate a permanent exclusion protocol." Vorskin laughed, a low, guttural scraping sound from his chest. "The Empire needs minerals to feed its foundries. We will no longer govern our expansion by the ghost stories of a silent race." The voting pillar's chimes rang out in a rapid, overlapping wave of electronic tones. The tallying board at the apex of the dome settled its numbers. The expansion decree was officially ratified by a mountain of green lights. Morwen did not cast a vote. She sat down, drew her hands inside her deep sleeves, and began downloading the unredacted human boundary files from the secure historical core. 2 light-years away, inside a hollowed-out iron asteroid known as Outpost Sentry 09, the silence was broken by the rhythmic metallic scrape of a hand tool. Commander Arthur Finch sat in a squeaking leather chair that had lost its backing material a decade ago. He was gray at the temples, his uniform jacket worn thin at the elbows, his right thumb marked by a thick white scar from an old line-cutter accident. He was methodically smoothing the edge of a bone-handled tool, completely unhurried by the orange warning light that had just begun to pulse on his central dashboard. "We have perimeter crossing, Commander," Lieutenant Talia Moss said. She did not look up from her primary navigation wheel, her knuckles turning pale as she locked the tracking telemetry. "Garzul transponders, 450 distinct military vessels have just breached the 4 light-year threshold." Finch didn't stop the steady stroke of his file. He blew a small cloud of white bone dust off the handle, inspected the grain under his desk lamp, and reached for a coarse leather book bound by heavy thread. "Did they send the standard expansion statement?" "They are broadcasting on all frequencies, sir," Analyst Ethan Finch replied from the secondary communications bench, setting down a tin cup of hot dandelion tea that smelled of chicory. "Warmaster Vorskin has cataloged this entire sector as unassigned industrial space. He has given us 15 minutes to withdraw all local civilian assets before they establish mineral claims." "There are no civilians within 40 light-years of this rock," Arthur Finch said mildly. He dipped an inkless lead stylus into a block of charcoal wax, drew a straight line across the ledger page, and flipped open a small hinged plastic guard near his right elbow. "Activate Project Aegisnull. Let the automated arrays take the grid positions." Across the Zephyr 7 sector, the empty space did not wake up with a roar. It woke up with a click, deep inside the dense methane ice rings of 86 gas giants, hidden behind the blinding solar glare of 12 local stars, and buried within thousands of tumbling iron asteroids. The automated platforms shook off 300 years of deep hibernation. They were not ships. They carried no crews, emitted no thermal exhaust, and used no active radar signals that could be tracked by an invasion fleet's defensive arrays. They were simple, cold-fusion magnetic launch tubes that had been preset to align their 12-meter barrels with the natural gravitational lanes of the sector. 12,000 separate units slid their locking pins into place, their internal logic processors calculating the rigid, doctrine-heavy line of the incoming Garzul wall of battle. War Master Vorskin stood on the bridge of the Sovereign Gorgon, his arms folded behind his armored back as the fleet advanced in perfect parade formation. The 12 heavy dreadnoughts occupied the center, flanked by 80 heavy cruisers in a diamond pattern that had 114 campaigns across the rim. Still no engine signatures from the local defenders, Vorskin asked, his lower mandibles twitching with anticipation. The sector remains clear, Warmaster, the sensor technician reported, his fingers tracing the flat lines of the long-range sweep. No defensive hulls detected. The internal systems of these planets are entirely dead. Vorskin smiled, his belief in human cowardice thoroughly confirmed. They were a species that hid behind old treaties because they lacked the iron to build a real navy. His hand moved to his ceremonial belt, his fingers brushing the calcified vertebrae of his past victories. The human border was an illusion, a paper fence that would dissolve at the first touch of a superior force. Then the main tactical display flickered. It did not show incoming torpedoes or high-energy plasma signatures. It showed a massive, sudden shift in local mass distribution across all 43 star systems. The planets are gaining weight, the sensor officer stammered, his voice dropping into an uneven whisper. No, sir, the asteroids, they are shedding their outer rock casings. Thousands of solid iron shapes are moving out of the debris fields. Before Vorskin could shout an order, a high-priority subspace transmission tore through the fleet's encryption block. High Scholar Morwen's face appeared on the secondary monitor, her silver skin cast in the red warning lights of her own archive room back at the Conclave. Vorskin, order a total emergency jump, Morwen screamed, her voice cracking with a terror that no delegate had heard from her species in 10 millennia. I have found the unredacted deployment logs from the First Contact Treaty. The humans didn't leave that space empty because they couldn't hold it. They emptied it to clear the line of fire. We hold the diamond wall, Vorskin hissed, his pride refusing to yield to an archivist's panic. Our shields can deflect any orbital bombardment they have prepared. They aren't using plasma, you fool, Morwen wept as her data stream began to break up under heavy electronic interference. Look at the speed of the mass readings. They are firing the star systems themselves. At the 8-minute mark, the first wave of projectiles arrived. Traveling at 4% the speed of light, the 2-ton solid tungsten slugs carried no explosive warheads, no guidance systems, and zero electronic tracking signals. They were simple blocks of industrial density, launched by an automated grid that had spent 3 centuries calculating every possible entry vector an arrogant invader would use. The Sovereign Gorgon's shield generators didn't even cycle their frequencies. The tungsten rods passed through the energy barriers as if they were empty air, their kinetic momentum instantly converting the forward armor plating into liquid slag through pure friction. The cruiser Vanguard 3 vanished next, its heavy internal reactor split clean in half before the crew could reach their secondary survival pods. Break formation, Vorskin roared, his armor splattered with the gray fluid of his sensor officer, who had been crushed by a flying bulkhead console. All ships execute random evasive vectors. But the Garzul fleet could not turn. Their rigid command doctrine required every captain to wait for invalidated Admiralty code from the flagship before shifting coordinate lines. In the 14 minutes it took for the secondary command relays to process the emergency order, the automated arrays fired 387 rounds per minute with absolute, uncaring precision. No shields held, no armors resisted, no ships escaped. Vorskin watched his tactical screen turn into a graveyard of blinking red markers. The diamond wall was gone, reduced to a jagged line of torn metal hulls that were being systematically broken into smaller pieces by the continuous silent hammer of the kinetic platforms. A single tungsten slug struck the flagship's main engine block, instantly halting its forward momentum and sending the 70-story dreadnought into a slow terminal spin. The bridge lights died for the final time. Vorskin looked out the shattered viewport, his upper mandibles broken, his blue carapace cracked open by the violent deceleration. There were no human capital ships in the void. There were no triumphant war cries on the radio channels. There was only the cold, mechanical hum of an invisible grid completing a 300-year-old cleaning cycle. On Outpost Sentry 09, the tactical screen shifted its display color back from red to a flat, uninterrupted amber glow. The entry vectors were empty again, save for an expanding cloud of titanium debris that would take 3 centuries to drift into the nearest gravity well. Commander Arthur Finch set down his file, picked up his inkless stylus, and opened the leather book. He did not write a description of the battle. He did not record the names of the cruisers that had died or the titles of the warlords who had brought them. He simply drew a single, clean charcoal line across the page beneath the list of numbers. The hand-bound ledger closed with a dry thud, its cold charcoal lines sealing an entire armada's erasure from the active registries. Arthur Finch blew a single flake of soot off his jacket, stood up from his squeaking chair, and walked over to the small stove to check the temperature of his dandelion tea. Back in the grand amphitheater of the Ethelgard conclave, 4,000 delegates sat in total, unbroken silence. The primary transmission feed from the Sovereign Gorgon had left nothing on the main display but a flat line of white static that hissed into the corners of the volcanic stone room. No one moved toward the central podium. No one proposed a second vote for annexation. The star maps of the outer rim remained exactly as they had been written 3 centuries ago, their red boundary markers glowing under the track lights. A single amber sensor light swept across an empty grid coordinate on the station display, tracking nothing but the quiet dark.